the Good Old Grateful Deadcast, the official podcast of the Grateful Dead. I'm Rich Mahan with Jesse Jarno, exploring the music and legacy of the Grateful Dead for the committed and the curious. Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Good Old Grateful Deadcast. We've got the last of our 3 episodes about St. Louis for you today as we dig into the music and stories from the Grateful Dead's 1973 shows at the Kiel Auditorium. All of this wonderful music is featured in the new Grateful Dead box set, Listen to the River, St. Louis 71, 72, 73. And through Season 4, you can get new episodes of the Good Old Grateful Deadcast right here every other week. Visit us at our website, dead.net/deadcast, and check out the extra materials we have for you to explore for this episode. Also at dead.net/deadcast are all of our past episodes, including complete seasons 1, 2, and 3, and you can link from there to any and all of the podcasting platforms available so you can listen where you like to listen. Please help us by subscribing, hit that like button, and leave us a review. It helps more than you know. Thank you. The new Grateful Dead live archival release has arrived. It's in stores. It's entitled Listen to the River, St. Louis 71, 72, 73. This set includes 7 previously unreleased concerts from St. Louis, recorded on December 9th and 10th, 1971 at the Fox, October 17th, 18th, and 19th, 1972, also at the Fox, and the focus of today's episode, October 29th and 30th, 1973 at the Kiel Auditorium. Production of the 20 CD set is limited to 13,000 individually numbered copies and will also be available in its entirety as a digital download exclusively at dead.net in Apple Lossless and FLAC 192.24. Dead.net will also exclusively release Light into Ashes, Fox Theater, St. Louis, Missouri, 10/18/72 as a double LP on 180-gram custom vinyl. Limited to 7,200 copies, the set focuses on an exceptional hour-plus jam plucked from the Grateful Dead's October 18th, 1972 show at the Fox. The breakout show from this set is Fox Theater, St. Louis, Missouri, 12/10/71, and will be available as a 3 CD set and a limited edition 5 LP set, also on 180-gram vinyl. All of these configurations of Listen to the River, St. Louis 71, 72, and 73 are available now. You can get more info and check it all out at dead.net. Well, we've come to the last 2 of the St. Louis shows in the Listen to the River box set, Kiel Auditorium, October 29th and 30th, 1973. The band was getting bigger, the audiences were growing larger, they had outgrown the Fox Theater and needed to play a larger room. The Grateful Dead had just released Wake of the Flood, so there was a fresh batch of tunes to play for the citizens of River City, and play they did. Both of these shows are filled with great jams and deft performances. We've got another stellar assemblage of guests in this episode, including Sepp Donahower, Tony Dwyer, Steve Brown, Thom Pallazola, Drea Stein, John Ellis, Jan Mahan, Bill Mahan, David Lemieux, Graeme Boone, and more archival interview audio with the band. Time to head on down the river with Jesse Jarno.
Go back, we led with a and it cry, cry, cry. Drop the clouds out of cover of a clear blue sky. Here's a cry for that woman. Gonna fight you a big ribbon. I'm gonna sit right here till I die.
In October of 1973, the Grateful Dead returned to St. Louis for 2 shows at the Kiel Auditorium. The shows now comprise the last discs and narrative conclusion to the new Listen to the River box set. Grateful Dead archivist and legacy manager David Lemieux.
The thing that I love about the box, amongst all the great things in it, is the story it tells. Mickey's just left, Pigpen is back, Skull and Roses. That is one band. That is one version of the band. It's all very distinctly Grateful Dead music, but it's very distinctly one style. October 72, very different than it was in December 71. And then October 73 is a very different band once again. And that's what I love about the Dead. Really, I mean, amongst everything, the one thing I can always come back to is how different Grateful Dead music is, if not tour to tour, year to year, but it's still very distinctly Grateful Dead music. And that's why I have no trouble at any time putting on a 1994 tape or a 1984 or a 1977 or a 72. To me, I get such great joy in all eras of Grateful Dead because they're so distinctly Grateful Dead and not like anything else in my entire music collection.
Backstage at the Kiel Auditorium before the second show, a college student named Danny Ruby interviewed Jerry Garcia and asked about the future. Garcia told him, "We roll like a river. We just ride out the course. If we are headed in a particular direction, then it's irreversible anyway." Today we point the Deadcast back down the big river of the mind to the Kiel Auditorium, fall 1973.
The Grateful Dead in St. Louis. Kiel Auditorium. October 29th Kiel and 30th. Auditorium. 1400 Market Street. In St. Louis. At 7 p.m. The Grateful Dead. All seats $5. All seats reserved. Kiel Auditorium. In St. Louis. The Grateful Dead. Come on, pretty women.
Got it? After 8 shows in 3 years at the Fox Theater, capacity 4,500, and one at the similarly sized Kiel Opera House, it was time to move up. Once again, our story begins with Tony Dwyer of Sky High Associates, who, with Sepp Donahower and Pacific Presentations, co-promoted the shows in St. Louis in 1972 and 1973, working with Sam Cutler in out-of-town tours. Thanks to Tony for these great radio ads, and thanks to David Gans for transferring them.
Don't forget, see and hear the Grateful Dead October 29th and 30th in St. Louis, produced by Pacific Presentations and Sky High Associates.
Going back to this buddy of mine, Jim Maxwell, who had made the guitar straps for Garcia and Weir and me, and he was doing front work for Barry Fay for various shows. This summer of 1973, I get a phone call from Maxwell. I'm in St. Louis, and he's in upstate New York. And he says, get your ass over here. And I said, to where? And he said, Watkins Glen. So I hop in the car with my girlfriend at the time, and we drove to Watkins Glen. And we get there, and, you know, it's the band, the Grateful Dead, and the Almonds.
That was Garth Hudson of the band, jamming his way out of a rainstorm at the Watkins Glen Summer Jam in July 1973, attended by an estimated 500,000 people, the biggest music festival of the 60s and 70s. If the Dead's gig at the Hollywood Bowl in 1972 is a breakthrough, as Sepp Donahower told us in the last episode, Watkins Glen was another leveling up.
I get there, and I've got my briefcase. I got a fucking Lacoste shirt on, pair of jeans. My girlfriend's got frizzy hair at 4 feet out on either side. And we get up to the stage, and Sam's up there, and he sees me, and he throws his 2 backstage buttons. And we go back. Every promoter in the world was there. I mean, everybody. Graeme was there. Sepp Donahower was there. One of the Belkin brothers was there. Shelley Finkel and Jim Koplik obviously were there. So anyhow, we get there, and Sepp says, Tony, come on over. We go, let's talk about what we're going to do in October. And that's where the whole thing for the 73 shows was hatched. I wanted to do Halloween, and we couldn't get it because they were going to do Chicago.
Sepp Donahower of Pacific Presentations.
I don't know whether it was a date issue, it might have been an availability issue, or they just wanted to make some more money. You know, it could have been financial reasons because the cost of touring and everything, you know, it's a business. Acts like to work their way up to larger rooms. Well, and also it might have been like after you've done one thing a couple of times, maybe it's time to try something new.
By email, Tony added that he and Sky High Associates proposed a 5-night Fox Theater run for October 1973, which would add up to slightly more than 2 nights at the Kiel. But the band's schedule was tight, And they promised their new sound system would be able to tame the arena.
I was concerned about the sound, and I was promised that there wouldn't be an issue, that we would be using the same sound system as used at Watkins Glen, sans the speakers in the back. I go to Long Island and hang out on the beach for a week and then go back to St. Louis to get to work on the show. And I realized this is a monumental tour. We got to sell 20,000 tickets, 21,000 tickets. We better get to work.
1973 was a monumental year for the Grateful Dead. That year, the band took nearly all of their business into their own hands, launching Grateful Dead Records and releasing Wake of the Flood. They had their very own press department for the first time, and they mobilized their forces. They were also a huge band, playing stadiums and arenas. In the months surrounding the band's fall tour, Rolling Stone, popular music's magazine of record at the time, devoted multiple stories to the band and their world, including a feature on Alembic, the band's sound offshoot, and culminating in a cover feature a few weeks after the trip to St. Louis. Helping to run the radio promotions for Grateful Dead Records in the fall of 1973 was Steve Brown. A while back, Rich and I visited Steve in California. Steve went way back with the Dead, before they were the Dead, to Palo Alto, circa 1963. Please welcome to the Deadcast, the most excellent Steve Brown.
We went to the Tangent, and there was this guy playing guitar with this gal, We didn't know who they were, stuff. And then later on, when I went back down there later, a year or two, this was 63, I think so, about 64, was it? Yeah, there was this bluegrass band that he was also in, this guy Jerry, and some other people. He was the same guy, but he was playing banjo and doing stuff, and he had about 4 guys, I think it was. After that, I didn't really see them until they appeared as the Warlocks all of a sudden at a couple clubs. At this point, I'd been out of local San Francisco radio, KSFO, where I'd worked when started when I was 15 years old, working there. And I got into the record distribution business and promotion business by 65. And so my route was the peninsula. So all of a sudden, everybody's talking about this band, the Warlocks. You got to go see them. They're playing down here, playing over here. You go see them and stuff. I checked them out at one point, and then it's a pizza place. And then another time, they were playing a run at the Inn Room in Belmont. And I went to all those gigs. Those were great. And we'd go out in the back where the cars were parked and stuff like that, sit in the cars with them and smoke. What was cool about the Inn Room is you go in and it's this long bar, and it's like stewardesses and guys that work in insurance and stuff all along sitting at the bar, and then it makes an L down at the end, and that's where the stage was, and that's a bunch of hippies that are seminal new hippies that had transferred from beatniks or whatever, or their parents were beatniks and now they're hippies, whatever, and college kids. And here's this guy that looks like he's in a biker gang doing the lead singing on this thing. And these guys are all like playing behind him, basically. And he's like the show. He's the one you're watching. But I'm noticing the guitarist is kind of cool, too. He's playing okay. And there's this young guy playing rhythm with him and stuff. And so it was really kind of seeing this Pigpen band when I was seeing. But I recognized Jerry, of course.
A few years later, Steve Brown actually got the Grateful Dead some of their first airplay in the most unlikely place. Steve was in the Navy.
And in the fleet in Vietnam, because that was my job for the Navy, was to run the recording studio for Westpac Fleet, which was the entertainment system on all the ships, where they had speakers in all the different compartments of the ship, and they had 4 different channels that they could tune into. So I had a whole slave of tape machines that I would put the masters on and then make copies from albums or from tapes I made, whatever, reel to reel in those days, right? And those tapes then were on a menu that went out to all the ships in the fleet, and they would order what they wanted to have for their ship, and so I'd be sending out all this different kinds of music, country, western, comedy, blues, rock and roll, a lot of rock. God, I mean, the timing was perfect for the good stuff, and San Francisco music, of course. But But the other stuff that went out is, hey, wait a second, I'm on the radio every night for like, 5-6 hours, depending how long I can keep it on, So I started air checking those and making tapes and sending those out to the fleet. And this was wild stuff because I had people come in and play, live on the air and stuff. So it became like this thing. And then I'd go up and take the Euro tape recorder that the Navy had given me to go around and do these interviews for hometown radio stations and stuff like that. And I'd go on PSA for $13 with my military and get on a plane and fly up on the weekend to San Francisco in my wife's apartment there where we were living and go to Winterland, and record Cream, live with the Navy's, tape and the Navy's recorder. And then as I'm leaving like that Cream concert, somebody says, the Dead are playing on Haight Street tomorrow. And it's like, oh, wow, Haight Street tomorrow. How much battery and how much tape do I have left? That kind of thing. And so, yeah, sure enough, noon, I'm standing there with my Navy recorder and Navy tape, Navy camera with Navy film, my camera actually with Navy film in it, some tracks. And that's that picture of Jerry walking up Haight Street that I just turned around and.
You probably know the photo of Jerry carrying his guitar down Haight Street, walking under the marquee of the Straight Theater, taken by Steve Brown on March 3rd, 1968. It's hanging in the Fillmore. Steve's recording, made with Navy equipment, is one of the very first Grateful Dead audience tapes.
What's funny is when I made this government-made concert tape of Cream live and the Grateful Dead on Haight Street all in one weekend, I came down and at midnight on Sunday night, I played both of them. Yeah. I played, because I only had 5 songs on the Dead, and the last song was like Pigpen getting the voice getting higher and higher and higher, because the tape's going slower and slower and slower. So it hurts me too, or something is getting, my voice. It's very weird. But in any case, yeah, I played both of them. So it was kind of a delayed simulcast. That's our tax dollars at work.
Needless to say, Steve was more than qualified to do radio promotion for Grateful Dead Records, who were gearing up to full speed in the summer of 1973. Trying to make it clear that they would be genuinely running things independently, and that this wasn't merely a vanity imprint belonging to a major label.
Me and another partner there at Grateful Dead Records were both involved with that, getting into the radio people, especially the ones at the universities where they had radio stations playing that kind of music a lot, especially Grateful Dead. We were going around. I even traveled around for a while going to these stations before the record was even completed. We were trying to set them up to let them know we'd be doing these albums on our own now as Grateful Dead Records, and that they would be the ones getting early copies as soon as we had them, and that we would in fact be able to get them into the shows and all that. So it was kind of just milking the whole record company radio scene out there, because we went to the record store distributors and all those people as well. Mainly I did a lot of Northeast travel, where we had a real good backing already with Grateful Dead, East Coast. Most of my stuff was done there, and it was done in many cases with locals who knew who the people were there, and I'd connect with them, and we'd drive around and go to all these places and talk to the people at the universities as well.
When the band themselves were on the road, they too were dispatched to radio stations.
We do the interviews, and the interviews counted as promo. I could get Bobby in easier than I could get Jerry oftentimes.
So it was that a month before the St. Louis show, during the run-up to Wake of the Flood, Bob Weir, Keith and Donna Jean Godchaux, and manager John McIntyre stopped by WAER in Syracuse when the band was playing in the Northeast. We'll be hearing bits and pieces from this interview today. It's pretty much the only audio I've ever found of Keith Godchaux speaking, so it's cool to get his perspectives too. When's the album coming out, Bob?
October 15th, I believe, is the release date. We took the entire month of August off and went in there every day.
Started the day we got back from Watkins Glen.
Yeah, started recording the day we got back from Watkins Glen, finished recording the day before we left.
So what songs are on it, Bob?
The first side starts off with Half Step, Mississippi, Uptown, Toodaloo. And then the second song is Keith's new song, Sing Your Blues Away. And the third song is Row, Jimmy Row. The fourth song is Stella Blue. Then song 1, side 2 is Here Comes Sunshine, then Eyes of the World. Thanks, and then My Sweet, the Weather Report Suite parts, or the prelude parts 1 and 2.
It was actually the second new Grateful Dead release in a few months. Over the summer, the band's now former label, Warner Brothers, released the last record from the Dead's old contract, their third live album in 3 years. This one featured tracks recorded at the Fillmore East in February 1970. It was called History of the Grateful Dead Volume 1, Bear's Choice.
Wake up, little Susie, wake up. Wake up, little Susie, wake up.
We had a commitment to Warner Brothers, and for the sake of expediency, I guess what we did was gave them some old tapes that I found and we had for a while named Bear has collected.
It represented the first release of some of Owsley Stanley's sonic journals, which we've talked about on 2 bonus Bear Drops episodes. Bear's Choice included the first appearance of the now infamous Marching Bears, appearing on the back cover via artist Bob Thomas.
We tried to at least initiate a sort of a history of the Grateful Dead program with them by labeling that History of the Grateful Dead Volume 1, so that hopefully they'll follow suit and say History of the Grateful Dead Volume 2, Volume 3, and that's what they can name their best of albums. But, you know, it's all together up to them.
You can tell the interviewers are heads. They even ask if the band is cool with the taping scene that was self-organizing at full force by 1973. Keith is cool with the taping scene.
I think it's far out. I think it's okay as long as they don't try to make a lot of bread off it and try to promote it in a big way, because most of those performances and the recordings are just not up to any sort of quality standards that I can.
Yeah. As far as I can tell, the people that are into it really like the music, and that's the reason they do it.
Right. I mean, if they want to tape it and take it home and listen to it and roll in or whatever, it's perfectly fine by me.
A few weeks after this interview, Rolling Stone would publish an article titled Mr. Tapes of Brooklyn about Les Capel of the Dead Relics Tape Club, soon to be the founder of Relics magazine. Les and the Relics crew, which included all-timer hero concert recordist Jerry Moore, were the vanguard of the Deadheads live taping revolution. The band didn't officially sanction concert recording until 1984, more than a decade later, but by 1973, there were free Grateful Dead tape exchanges in a half-dozen cities. Clearly the demand was there.
Maybe someday we'll release another sort of Bear's Choice album, which is just a sort of a pick of some of our tape archives. Our tape archive grows with every performance, so that it'll be a good long time before we get around to doing anything like that again, but we might do it again.
Weir was right on both counts. The archive certainly did continue to grow, and it certainly was a good long time before the band put out anything else that resembled Bear's Choice, culled from a 2-track live recording. 20 years, in fact, the very first Dix pick, released in 1993 and recorded at the very tail end of the full fall 1973 tour, which John McIntyre announced on that radio broadcast in Syracuse.
The whole country will be covered starting the 15th of October and going through the middle of December.
The band's machinery was both growing and constantly changing.
Sam Cutler, out-of-town tours, our booking agent. He was the road manager, and then he was road manager and booking agent. And his booking agency, he handles more than just the Grateful Dead, you know. So that was consuming more and more of his time. So right now, Rock Scully's being the road manager, Sam's being the booking agent, you know, so we switch around a lot.
Back to co-promoters Tony Dwyer and Sepp Donahower.
And I realized, I said, you know, we did 13,500 seats last year, and now we're talking about 21,000. 21,000. They said, that's a big jump.
Tony and I collaborated on these dates. We'd sit down, figure out a marketing plan, where to put what dollars, agree on a marketing plan. He'd execute it, part of it, and I'd do some of it, and then put the show on. And he was a delight to work with. We still talk like every week, 50 years later. They weren't a shoe-in act back in the days. You had to promote them. You just didn't, like, whisper it on the sidewalk and it would sell out. Few markets like that, but most of the markets, you had to work the dates to fill a house. A lot of promoters didn't know how to reach their audience because, you know, the Grateful Dead's audience was a specific segment, you know, the demographic and the age demographic, you know, for concerts, and you had to know how to go get the word to them. within a wide geographic range. So you had to have some, marketing expertise, to their customer, which goes along with what style of graphics you do, how you do your radio spots, what radio station you're on, which counterculture tabloid are you in, a lot of stuff goes into getting the word out and getting everybody there.
I write a letter to Rakow. I get on the phone to Sam, get on the phone to John McIntyre, and I said, guys, I need some help. I mean, I know it's on me, but I need some help. Wake of the Flood had just been pressed. I said to Rakow, put Steve on a plane and bring a copy of the fucking record. So he did that. Steve stayed at my house, and we went out to KC Radio.
Providing a wide spectrum of progressive music from all over our planet. 95 FM. Rockin' stereo constantly. KC Radio. KSHE.
Steve remembers it being closer to the day of the show.
I wound up being flown there. I guess it was the day before. And I remember it was either, I don't remember the person as Tony, or if it was somebody else that worked in the staff for the auditorium that for the show promotion that picked me up and took me through a little tour of St. Louis, which was really interesting because I'd never been there before. I mean, this travel in some parts of the country was new to me. So he was going through a lot of what I guess the kind of the racial thing that was going on at that time during those days, and it was kind of an interesting way to wind up going to the auditorium when we went through all these different little parts of town, and he described what was going on between people there.
One afternoon, early evening, and Bob Birch was there, and we walked in, and he said, "What do you got?" I said, "Well, we got a new Grateful Dead recording, and we got a show in 2 weeks, so we need some help." And Birch says, okay. So he puts Inagata DeVita on, or something, that's 20 minutes long, and puts some headsets on and starts listening to it. He hears Weather Report Suite, and he hears a couple other things. He goes, "Holy shit."
My suite? That's more or less the Weather Report suite. Yet another song about the weather.
Listen to the thunder shout, I am, I am, I am, I
The album was premiered there at KSHE that night, 2 weeks before the show, and they played the shit out of the album. Just played it constantly.
Was a treat to be able to hear it on the radio because it came out on the 15th of October, and this was a show on the 29th and 30th.
It was a big help. It was a big help. New music, completely different than what they had last heard, and it worked well.
It had been a somewhat bonkers fall in the offices of Grateful Dead Records.
We were setting up a lot of the stuff from our office there at Fifth and Mission and, San Rafael, taking care of all the stuff on phone calls and getting contact with people all around the country as the album came out. We also ran into a thing almost immediately, which was really weird, that we started finding out there was bootlegs coming out of the New Jersey area there and stuff, and we wound up having to talk to people from the FBI, on our phones in the office, which was very weird to get a call at the Grateful Dead office from the FBI. There was that kind of thing happening just right after it came out. They were starting to bootleg it, which was, finally looked at and broken down, and we came up with our own way of printing these things so they could be different looking than the bootleg ones, and changed a few things on our production of the albums.
The piracy of Wake of the Flood would plague the young record company. Though the Dead were one of the biggest bands in the United States, they suddenly found themselves with a whole range of new challenges while also continuing to grow, as Sepp Donahower remembers.
They were still in a building stage, and that's why Sam liked working with us, because we knew how to go out there and really promote dates. Back in those days, you had to go print tickets and you had to take them out to, make sure you had to go constantly be shuffling the ticket inventories between ticket outlets, make sure nobody runs out. It's laborious. A lot of work goes into it to maximize the gate.
Driving that train, high on cocaine. Casey Jones, you better watch your speed.
The Grateful Dead, October 29th and 30th at 7 p.m. in Kiel Auditorium, 1400 Market Street, St. Louis. Reserved seats are $5. Tickets are available on campus at the Record Service, 704 South 6th.
Truckin', got my chips cashed in.
Back in those days, maybe a third of the audience was hardcore Deadheads, and the rest was the general concert audience. And that over time, the quantity of Deadheads built, of course, but in this initial exposition of the band, and touring them, in the early 70s, they were building that base. So they had to put, the shows had to pull in the ones that are curious, too, and the general concert audience to see what they were all about.
The incomparable Grateful Dead is coming to St. Louis.
Get back truckin',
All seats for both nights are on a reserved basis at $5 each. Tickets are available at Discount Records, 611 South Illinois in Carbondale. The Grateful Dead, October 29th and 30th in Kiel Auditorium, St. Louis. Produced by Pacific Presentations and Sky High Productions.
They weren't everybody's cup of tea, and that's why there was a limited number of promoters that worked with them. Because, they wanted to do things their way, not your way. So you either were somebody that could work with the Grateful Dead or you weren't, and there was a lot of promoters that, because, they wanted to play extended length sets, play all night, and they had all of this equipment demands, and setup costs and so on.
Well, we got into sort of a spiraling scene where we had to have a lot of employees in a huge overhead and in this PA that we've been building. In order to pay for it all, we had to play bigger places. In order to play bigger places and get decent sound, we have to buy a bigger PA. And in order to buy a bigger PA, we have to make more money and play bigger places.
That was a fucking nightmare. Because Pacific Presentations, Danny Kresge at Pacific Presentations would get blueprints for the towers, and he would send them to me. And I would order the scaffolding and do the timing and whatnot. And then 3 days later, they said, revision. And I'd call the scaffolding company and say, we need, 14 more 4x8 3/4 inch plywoods, and we need to go, 10 feet. We need to go another frame higher, and we got to do this, we got to do that. And then 3 days later, I'd get another fucking revision. And Danny would write this, guess fucking what?
We make sure that we stay broke. We make sure that we spend anything that comes in.
The whole wall of sound thing was interesting because you're sitting there with the speakers behind you, which, everybody is, you can't do that. It'll all get feedback, and the technical element that makes that work was the twin microphones out of phase. They cancel each other, so you eliminate the feedback.
A month after the Kiel shows at the Boston Music Hall, the Dead's crew would stack the speakers vertically, and the wall of sound would rise from there. But at the Kiel, it was already an imposing skyline of speaker cabinets. Most of the tie-dye sound system had been replaced with the newest utilitarian speaker cabinets from Alembic with no speaker grills at all. By early 1973, the phase-canceling double microphone system to eliminate feedback was already in effect.
The night before the first show, so it's October 28th, I go to the Hilton, and everybody's there, everybody and their friends. And McIntyre's sitting there, and he goes, I say, hey, Tony, what's up? He said, is the scaffolding up? And I'm not going to tell him that it's not up yet because I wasn't going to pay rent for the fucking theater, for Kiel overnight when I can get the guys there at 7 o'clock in the morning. So I just said, oh, yeah, don't worry about it, John. Towers will be up. And, sure enough, they got there, and we got the scaffolding up, and it was a fucking trip. Then we had to go out and get a motorized fucking lift to get the speakers up because guys were too tired. I mean, it was fucking unbelievable.
Tony had watched the Dead's equipment grow since he first met the band in 1970.
That equipment that was used at the Fox in the 1970 show came in a Ryder box truck. And then in 72, it was 4 40-foot semis. The 73 shows, I would say there was at least twice the equipment, if not 3 times the equipment that went into the 72 shows. Easily. The amount of equipment was massive. When it came to the 73 shows, there was shit everywhere.
According to the Rolling Stone feature by Charles Perry that ran the next month, called A New Life for the Dead, there were some 459 speakers in the new system, spread between the musicians, the scaffolding, and the monitor systems. In 1970, the only non-musicians that arrived with the band were Owsley and Ramrod. By 1973, alongside the band, was a support crew of 17. 1 road manager, 2 truck drivers, a 4-person lighting crew led by Candace Brightman, 9 quippies, and someone selling merch. But like the Dead, it could change on any given night. They were in big rooms now. The Kiel Auditorium definitely wasn't the Fox Theater, as St. Louis head Thom Pallazola remembered.
I saw more shows at Kiel than I did practically any place else, I think. I saw a lot there. It didn't have the sound that the Fox did, and it wasn't intimate. You could get, if you had the full floor filled and all of the seating, I think you could get around 15,000 people in there. So it just wasn't as intimate.
Drea Stein, host of KDHX's Other One, was there. She'd seen the Dead for the first time at the Fox in 72, but the Kiel Auditorium was a more regular spot for rock shows.
We went to a lot of the shows at Kiel, which was, I think, around a 12,000 seat venue or maybe even more. It was, huge. It was a very sterile environment in terms of it was a building. It was square. There was none of this Art Deco insanity that filled the place like the Fox. Or even the Kiel the Kiel Opera House was, once again, much more Art Deco-ish. It had a lot of just environment that was conducive to creativity to me. Kiel, depending on where you sat, the sound could be good, could be bad. I found at Kiel, the further away from the stage you were, if you got back by the balcony, the sound got much better. It boomed a lot if you were in the middle. If you weren't up front, and then when you were up front, you were outside of the cone, so you lost some of the sound that way too. So if you get back, you got like the perfect spot where the V cone was.
But it did have the new sound system.
But it was an interesting experiment, no question about it. Visually, of course, it's had a big wow factor. When people walk in, they look at the stage and go, wow.
It was unbelievable seeing that wall of speakers there. I think the 73 show, if I remember right, was the first time that they, at least in the St. Louis area, they had part of the wall with them in the Opera House. They can only get so much of it in there.
And while the Dead certainly drew an unusual audience of returning Deadheads who hung on the band's every move, the St. Louis 73 shows are a good reminder that the Grateful Dead were also playing to new, curious listeners at every stop who'd never seen the band before. On the first night at the Kiel, that included the parents of my co-host Rich. Please welcome to the good old Grateful Deadcast, Bill and Jan Mahan.
We were from Southern California, and when we moved to St. Louis, the people that ended up being our friends thought we were probably the wildest couple initially that they would ever know, being from Southern California, the den of iniquity. And it turns out we were the babes in the woods. We hadn't ever been to a concert like that. When somebody said concert, I was thinking of dressing up, maybe dinner first, and, seeing something. Well, I can't say that the Dead wasn't remarkable, but at any rate, it was something entirely different.
we knew the Beatles and Elvis Presley and stuff like that, but we never knew any of the groups like Emerson, Lake and Palmer and the Dead and the other groups like that until we moved to St. Louis. And a friend of ours, Don Logie, was a rock and roll enthusiast, and he introduced us to all of these groups that we had no knowledge of, or at least weren't aware of before. We enjoyed doing things with Don and Susan. So anything they suggested that they wanted to do, we were willing to try. I mean, that's how we got started with skiing, is because they all went skiing and it sounded like a lot of fun. The same thing with the music. So going to the Dead concert really led us to a lot of other concerts.
Who was my babysitter?
Probably one of the Martineau kids.
So while young Rich was at home with one of the Martinoff kids, off Bill and Jan went to see the Grateful Dead at the Kiel.
As we were walking in, I do remember one young man walking along the street and
this is funny.
Commenting, spare chicks, spare change, spare chicks, spare change. And we've kind of carried that forward over the years.
Oh, yeah, we have. John dropped us off. I remember it was dark, and he dropped us off on the east side of Kiel. And I think he went to go park, but it was complete melee inside. Even, like when you even go to the movies or you go to any symphony or anything, it's a quiet, hushed lobby and so forth. Not at all. It was bright lights when we went in and gave them the tickets at the door. And it was just this scene of complete buzz. I mean, it was just fun, loud, noisy. Not small groups, just packed people in the foyer. I remember that.
And smoke-filled.
And, already.
Another person whose parents were at the Kiel was Grateful Dead manager John McIntyre.
John McIntyre's parents lived in, I think, in Belleville, Illinois, someplace across the river. And they were elderly, and they wanted to go to the show. So John had called me and asked me to reserve 2 seats for him. And I reserved them row 1, seat A and B. And we get there, the tickets are at the box office for him. And John comes over, he said, Tony, where are my parents' tickets? And I said, oh, where are your parents? He said, well, they're coming shortly. And I said, well, tell them to pick them up at will call. So he said, well, let's walk over there. So we walk over there and we meet his parents. And I hand them the ticket. I get the tickets and I hand them to him. And John looks at him. He goes, "What, Tony? What the fuck are you thinking?" He said, "You put my parents in the front row." So we take the tickets and he said, "Let's walk back." And we find these 2 people that are sitting on the first level above the floor, front row, and we switched tickets with them, and we saw 2 kids just fucking ecstatic that all of a sudden they're sitting front row, nearly on stage, and John's parents were not going to be blasted.
It was only a few days after Steve Brown's birthday.
On the 26th, I was 29 years old, and on the 29th, there I was on the stage, and someone took a picture of me hanging on the stage there on one of the amps, and I keep that in my album here. Anyway, that was a good time for me because I was just really ripe. I'd been in the record business and radio and had a band out of the Haight-Ashbury that I played in and jammed a bunch with other people and stuff. Yeah, so there was a world that just ripened on that particular time when I wound up there in Kiel and had this whole new world blossoming even further out for myself, which is really a real special time.
They blinked the lights, just the perfunctory blinks, and then in we went. And there were already a lot of people in there. And I don't remember the whole seating area being even lit up. I think it was dark when we went in, and the stage was all lit.
It was showtime. The Dead took to the stage in front of a backdrop featuring the Wake of the Flood album art by Rick Griffin.
The crowd was so enthusiastic, and they did sing along, and they were on their feet, And there was a lot of dancing up in front of all the seated area, just like there was at any Dead concert.
Besides alternating songs between Jerry Garcia and Bob Weir, the Dead didn't plan their set lists at all, as Keith and Donna and Weir told WAER.
Kind of a natural pattern as evolved.
But we never discussed what we're going to play.
We've got a few starter tunes, and we've got a few ending tunes, and in between is just whatever happens.
Danny Ruby of the Daily Illini asked Jerry Garcia about this backstage the next night. We hope that the audience will like what happens naturally, but it all starts on stage. Sure, a lot of people come only to hear Casey Jones, but there are others that come only for Dark Star. We play what seems right at the moment. All the decisions are made on stage.
Gone to plan a weeping willow by the bank's green edge. It will grow, grow, grow. Sing a lullaby beside the water. Lovers come and go. The river, roll, roll, roll.
Danny Ruby also made another astute observation, writing, "Rivers are another significant Dead image. Possibly the reason lies in the nature of the waterways. Perhaps it's because they lead somewhere."
When we get to 73, which is a totally different band by this point than it was even in 72, we've got all of the Wake of the Flood material that had been introduced in February of 73. Plus, they'd now recorded Wake of the Flood in August of 73. It had come out 2 weeks earlier, October 15th. So this was, again, a new band with a whole new business outlook as well. Maybe that had something to do with why they played the Kiel. They had Grateful Dead Records that had just begun. They needed to make some money.
At least in the balcony of the Kiel Auditorium, though, the prototype for the Wall of Sound wasn't working for John Ellis.
Man, that's the one that, I kind of walked out on. That's true, but I have to back up a little bit. That's the first time ever that I didn't have incredible seats. It became much harder to get tickets. By the time they played Kiel Auditorium, it was easier to get a ticket, but it was easy to get a really crappy ticket. As great as they say the Wall of Sound is, that thing was designed for certain, or came off best in certain venues. My seats were not only on the side, they were up, So for me, it was kind of slap in the face, like, hey, who are these new fans? And it's like, I'm used to going to see these guys when there's only 1,000 to 2,000 people there. Or the later Fox shows, it was still manageable because it was, I think the Fox holds 4,000 people or so. So, it still seemed like a private party if you had good seats at the Fox.
Thankfully, Kid Candelario's recordings of the Kiel Auditorium are warm and full.
The Kiel shows, Dick had given me DAT tapes. I still have the DAT tapes in my cabinet behind me. Dick had given me DAT tapes in 1999 of the Kiel shows. It was the first time I'd heard them. And again, they are very, very good shows. And one is another one, and one is a Dark Star. In addition to that, you get Weather Report Suite, the whole suite. You get Eyes of the World. You get the songs that they weren't playing yet in 1972.
Near the end of the first set on the first night, they get to the material new to the repertoire since their last pass through town at the Fox Theater the previous October. There's an electrified version of the George Jones hit, The Race Is On, written by Don Rollins, previously sung in 1969 and 1970 by Bob Weir, with Bobby Ace and his Cards from the Bottom of the Deck, the New Riders of the Purple Sage, and the Acoustic Dead. In the spring of 73, not long after sitting in with the New Riders, they revived it with the updated Bakersfield Dead sound.
Now the race is on, and here comes right at the backstretch. Heartaches are going to the inside. My tears are rolling back, trying not to fall. My heart's out of the running to the scratch for another shake. The race is on, and it looks like heartache, and the winner loses all.
And then it was on to 3 of Jerry Garcia and Robert Hunter's most beautiful new songs.
Broken heart, don't feel so bad. You ain't got half of what you thought you had.
Row Jimmy was among the new songs written with parts for Donna Jean Godchaux.
Gonna get there, I don't know. Seems to come on, way to go. Get out, roll,
Thom Pallazola.
Song-wise, they were kind of working on some of the things that were coming out on Wake of the Flood. So there was some of that I wasn't familiar with, but, getting to hear some new music from them was pretty fabulous.
And there was, of course, Eyes of the World, written with swing to spare, and a big gang sing-along with entwined guitar parts by Jerry Garcia and Bob Weir. The Dead Freaks at WAER made Weir speak out Robert Hunter's lyrics for them.
Can't wake up and find out that you are the eyes of the world.
Great. What's the line after that? Out of curiosity.
The heart has its beaches, its homeland and thoughts of its own.
Wake now, discover that you are the
song that the morning brings. The heart has its seasons, its evenings, and songs of its own.
Who wrote that?
The words are Hunter and the melody is Garcia.
At the Kiel, as with most versions of Eyes of the World from 1973, it was performed as it was debuted earlier in the year, seemingly conceived as the first half of a two-part suite, in which it was followed by a delicate Jerry Garcia-Robert Hunter song, China Doll. I love the way everybody in the band is playing little delicate bits of lead parts.
Yesterday I begged you before I hit the ground. All I leave behind me is only what I found.
The song would become an outtake from Wake of the Flood, but returned on From the Mars Hotel in 1974.
Take up your China doll. Take up your China doll. It's only fractured. Just a little nervous from a fall.
Played live, the Eyes of the World China Doll Suite is everything the studio Dead couldn't contain. The album version of Eyes of the World is truncated.
It's edited down to just the head of the song, a couple of bars in between each verse of upriffing, and then at the end, a sort of an extended bass solo.
The Dead Freaks grilling Weir were obviously fans of the tune and have a pertinent question.
Does it get into the 7/4 jam?
No, it does not.
You know, the part in 7/4. The version from the first night at the Kiel. Thankfully, that piece of music survived in Eyes of the World up through the end of 1974, when the band took an extended break from the road, recorded nearly every single night by the band's crew. Though Eyes of the World is credited to Jerry Garcia and Robert Hunter, that piece of music developed organically over the course of several performances in early 1973, beginning from a bass riff by Phil Lesh.
And if you like 7/4, we got more material coming.
From the sounds of things, it was a pretty different vibe at the Kiel compared to the Fox. Jan Mahan.
I remember one thing that's a bit off color, but I'll tell you anyway. It was intermission, and Susan suggested that she and I would go to the ladies' room, and I use the term loosely. And so she knew where it was, and she took me there, and we walked in, and there was sawdust all over the floor. And I said, Susan, what is this for? And she said, I'll tell you later. So we were in the ladies' room and we finished. And before we had left the ladies' room, I understood what the sawdust was for. There were a number of young women who were quite ill. It was not a typical theater restroom experience.
And at the end of the show, Rich's parents and their friends got the song they wanted to hear.
I do know that Susan was very happy because I think they closed with Sugar Magnolia. The ones that Susan and Dawn introduced us to, and they played a lot that they liked, Susan's favorite was Sugar Magnolia, and I've always liked it. It's so up.
Sugar magnolia, blossom blooming, that's all empty and I don't care. Soon that baby down by the river, knew she'd have to come up soon, but never.
Steve Brown was out and about both nights. Somehow it was his job.
I got to enjoy the shows. That was the good part of it. Sometimes it was backstage just rolling joints and putting them in Jerry's guitar case. But, you know, there was a lot of it was being out there with the crowd and the audience and seeing the responses and then being able to talk to people that were there, again, from radio or press and keeping them, you know, jacked up, you know, that kind of thing. And it's really fun. It was a good job to have.
That week, a student from the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana named Danny Ruby followed the band on tour, writing a story for the Daily Illini, and offered this scene report. Outside the Kiel Auditorium in a park, Tuesday, waiting for the final show. All around, people are accumulating. Most of those that show up at noon for a 7 o'clock show are genuine deadheads. A carload from Tennessee with the license plate Jed share our bottle of wine, and a guy from Long Island showed up with a tape of Monday night's concert. End quote. It was an extremely fertile period for the Dead's music. You can understand why the tapers abounded.
Every time we've ever done a 1973 release, St. Louis shows were given consideration. And I can think of several, 10, 19, 73 is one of them. The Winterland box set from, 13 years ago, the November shows, UCLA, San Diego, the Denver shows.
It's a well-plumbed period, and for good reason. Like pages in an artist's sketchbook, you can see themes and variations emerging and evolving. One fun part about tracking the Dead's music through the early 70s is hearing the jams and themes that evolved from show to show. For example, the band debuted Truckin' in 1970, played it at the Fox in 71 and 72, but it was only by 73 that the song had finally developed one of its signature moves. From 1969 through 1972, a variation on Paul Simon's Feelin' Groovy appeared regularly in Dark Star. Here it is in Dark Star, recorded at the Fox Theater in October 1972. But by 1973, the Feelin' Groovy jam moved over to the transition between China Cat Sunflower and I Know You Rider. Here it is from the second night at the Kiel in 73. Perhaps obviously, there was no vehicle for these jams like the interstellar wonder called Dark Star. In many ways, this was why they went through all the fuss. To build a giant high-fidelity sound system, to record their shows, to do these tours in giant bulky arenas, it was to find moments like these, when they were comfortable enough to play Dark Star. Jerry Garcia famously said of the acid test that they had the freedom to play or not play. That wouldn't be true in later years, with tickets and contracts and tours and such, but the Dead always held on to that freedom about whether or not to enter into the intimate open musical space represented by Dark Star. For 2 years in a row, the St. Louis Heads got extended versions. Please welcome back to the Deadcast musicologist Graeme Boone of Ohio State University, our tour guide for some extended stargazing as we once again pass through the transitive nightfall of diamonds.
I think that in the early Dead, you do have that idea of a little bit of a mostly shorter form songs. And it's because where they're coming from, right? They're coming from R&B. They're coming from the Beatles and all this early 60s short form music, but they've been listening to jazz. So they're super interested in long form music. But how do you make long form music? And so they have to craft a sense of time where they have a way to open up. And so, yeah, Dark Star and some other songs, they're able to start to let go of the chord progression and start to find a way to, it's very frontier music, you know, to make a music that isn't just relying on a clear chord progression like Love Light or something, right? So, yeah, I don't know. How do you analyze that? It's a lot to think about. But for me, the Dark Star thing really hinged on that 27th of February, 1969 on Live Dead. And of course, I got that album when it came out, and I just lived inside of that performance of that whole double album for a long time. And I think it did stimulate in me an awareness of the incredible emotional power of harmony and this idea of a free counterpoint that the Dead excelled at, and that exploration of the limits, you know, where could it lead? And, you know, at that time, they did not yet do kind of freak out spacey music in Dark Star, right? They did that in other places. But for me, that movement away from a secure harmonic underpinning into this exploration of really what was E minor, that other chord, was emotionally very intense because it was unhinged from that home chord. Where was it leading, you know? And so toward the end of that song, there's that climax where all the band comes together, and then with Jerry's climactic riffing, they center it back on the Dark Star progression, and they center it back on A major and on that Dark Star progression. There's a sense of coming home. It's extremely romantic. It's extremely existential. But, you know, retrospectively, you can understand why Jerry could have come to hate it, right? Because it's just such a pat answer to the drama of Dark Star. Because after that moment in February and March, you know, they really start getting into space after that. They start introducing things that go beyond this idea of a romantic climax and a return to the home harmony. And they eventually give up the second verse. I mean, all this, I think, is part of a trajectory of searching for meaning that goes far beyond that original container.
Over the next few years, between the versions in early 1969 and autumn 1973, where we're tuning in today, the Dark Star Jam continued to loosen and change shape.
This is a really wonderful Dark Star for many reasons. It doesn't go into a lot of extremes, but there's a lot of contrapuntal interplay among the musicians, and the recording of this performance is very beautiful in the way it distributes the band. You have Jerry on the left channel, you have Bob clearly on the right channel, and then around the middle, you have Keith, Phil, and Bill. It makes a really nice distribution. You can really hear things. There's a lot of wonderful definition. It's an improvement over the old tapes that were circulating for sure. And it creates such a nice spectrum of sound.
It's a great way to focus on the musical personalities of the players, as we'll hear. This is Bob Weir describing his own musical voice about a month before this on WAER.
I just like chords, and I like to stretch a chordal texture as far as I can, and see if I can create a mood by making richer and richer chords, or more simple chords if the situation calls for it. I guess a lot of my chordal ideas come from either Baroque influences or people like Gil Evans.
A key to the Dead's improvisation, especially in 1973, is of course Phil Lesh's lead bass playing. Here's how his bandmate Keith Godshare described it in the same interview.
The typical position of a bass player in a band, Phil doesn't really play that role because he doesn't play solid, like Robbie Danko. Rick Danko in the band plays really straight. If there's 4 beats in a major, he'll play plan, all on the major, on the tonic.
Phil's bass playing had other charms.
His tone is at the bottom, and it fills in that space. But in terms of, he plays a melody-oriented type of bass. And in terms of where he places the notes he chooses to play in the chords, they're not traditional bass notes. Like you rarely catch him playing a root.
And it pushed his bandmates to new places.
Phil's playing really stimulates, makes it impossible to play straight chord changes, and it really, he is really brilliant in the inversions and voicings of his bass notes. And just to flow with him, it kind of leads you naturally to play chord changes which flow more and have different structures and just straight ahead.
With all that in mind, it's time for Dark Star.
What you're going to hear as we go into this recording is that it starts out with your classic Dark Star rhythm, which is a swing rhythm. So bump, ba bump, ba bump, ba bump, which you can break down into 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 if you want. And that's as opposed to a classic straight rhythm, which would be a 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 with even beats and divisions of the beat. Now that's significant because we're going to see through this recording that they actually switch, thanks to Bill largely, from swing to straight rhythm and then back to swing. And there's all kinds of play on that swing to straight, which is just classic Dark Star strategy. So, of course, the classic Dark Star tag. Audience is so excited. Jerry playing his classic riff. Listen to how Phil is all over it. Beautiful chords on A, the home note. And there you have a beautiful riff from Keith, and da-da-da, which is going to come back. Bob is playing a little bit of that Dark Star progression, but Phil is free. Really interestingly here, Jerry is not in the foreground. In fact, in this whole recording, he really isn't totally emphasized, partly because of the balance, but partly because there's so much going on. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, and 2. You can hear that nice swing rhythm. Now they're back to 1. There, that riff comes back from Keith. And then they go to 5, the E minor chord. Then to 1 to A again, but Bob is playing A minor. He often flirts back and forth between A minor and A major. So, already here at the very beginning, there's some ambiguity about what the chords are. And that's classic Dead, right? Beautifully articulated. It's like a poly counterpoint. So here we have the feeling of being in 1 again. And then 5. A feeling of suspended harmony in this counterpoint. And then on 5. And there's that little riff from Keith coming back. And then back to A. We haven't had the Dark Star progression fully played. It's all being... they're dividing the wafer and passing it around among the apostles of this progression, and everybody's got their own take on it. Long. Keith articulating strongly the Dark Star progression, and yet still moving. So Jerry hits that high note and then comes back down, and already Keith is off into another idea.
In the early 70s, there were a number of motifs that appeared in the Dead's jams. Putting names on what exactly they are, though, gets a little ontologically tricky.
So here they are in the middle of a jam. It's the first jam still. And they're really getting into this counterpoint. Now you can hear them hitting this da-da-da-da on D, Keith imitating Phil, and then an F sharp. No. Why? But they're moving. Phil's moving around. And what happens here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Bill has switched out of swing rhythm into a straight rhythm. And this sets up 10 minutes of jamming right there. 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Da, 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 da. Now here it's as if they're playing a chord progression. The chord of A, the chord of B. And then into what sounds like E minor. No. Keith picking up the sense of E minor. Really nice harmonic wandering. Everybody contributing, and then all of a sudden getting into a funky rhythm, and then in B minor, bump, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's the Solomon's Marbles riff from Blues for Allah. Beautiful. 7-beat cycle. But you know, not everybody's onto it, so he kind of smooths out into an 8-beat cycle. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Solidly on B minor. Here we get a little bit of Wes Montgomery from Bob. Interesting jazz stylings in his comping in this era. Still on B minor, and they're exploring that Solomon's Marbles idea, which is just coming together. You know, fascinating is that Jerry's right in the middle of it, but he's not leading the pack. He's just part of what's going on. It makes this really very special.
Dead scholar Light into Ash has made a deep dive into what he calls the Proto-King Solomon's Marbles jam, a genetically related musical idea. We've linked to it at dead.net/deadcast. It's a jam motif led by bassist Phil Lesh that the band played throughout late 1972 and into 1973. Here's the jam coalescing in the February 26, 1973 Dark Star from Pershing, Nebraska, released on Dick's Picks 28. Doesn't actually sound much like the song King Solomon's Marbles, as recorded on Blues for Allah. But it's still an identifiable mood. Another one of the Dead's most famous improv motifs appears in the next segment of the Kiel 73 Dark Star, the descending pattern that tape collectors often labeled the Mind Left Body Jam.
So, really nice riff from Keith here on the key, in the key of A, and listen to the clip notes from different players. This pointillistic style is really a key part of the Dead's ethos at this point in time. Clip notes from Jerry, clip notes from Bob. Of course, the drumming can sound very pointillistic. So they're in A, but then Phil is pushing B, and then Keith comes into B minor. So is it going to be another B minor jam? All of a sudden, no. Because Jerry slows everything down and plays the Mind Left Body jam. And within 10 seconds, everybody's together on it. Now, this is back in the key of A, nicely setting up the first verse and chorus later on. Now, this Mind Left Body jam is completely different from a lot of what came before because it's in such a strict pattern. You know, it's a 4-beat feel and it's a 4-bar pattern. So 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, 4, 1. And it's still in a straight meter, right? So that shift from swing to straight is still happening 10 minutes later. Beautiful. Bob has a phasing on his guitar. And Jerry's still sitting back, but he's about to start his own solo, which is where things get really interesting. very slow, pensive solo from Jerry rising up to the higher levels of the guitar. Really nice filler from Keith. And then up to the yet higher level, the top octave. Jerry's getting into the slide. So he's taking out a slide. It sounds like a National Steel guitar. Sort of a rough, floating, sliding pitch evoking that great early blues and all of those traditions that he loved so much. So they really get behind Jerry now. Now throughout this jam, it's the same 4-beat, 4-bar pattern. Listen to Bill. Bill's gone just into simple accompaniment. He's going to come out of it a little bit as this thing moves forward. So everything's about interpreting. Each 4-bar run-through is a little bit different. Each one, Bob is hitting different notes. Keith is exploring different riffs and accompaniments. And of course, Phil. So they bring it to conclusion. Slowing down. And there it comes. Bill on the classic Dark Star line, but still embroidering it. Jerry hits his own Dark Star riff, and the progression is off. Really slow, quiet, just beautiful, setting up that first verse. It's the first time we've heard the progression like this in the whole song. It's been 15 minutes. Just wonderful creation of a long jam.
The name Mind Left Body is derived from the Paul Kantner song, Your Mind Has Left Your Body, released on Baron von Tolbooth and the Chrome Nun in 1973, on which Jerry Garcia played pedal steel guitar. But Your Mind Has Left Your Body was recorded in December 1972, and the theme appeared in Dead Jams starting about 8 months earlier.
The thing about it is that descending riff is so fundamental, and it comes up in so much music that it can come up for different reasons. I mean, Phil apparently he has no interest in the idea that would have come from Paul Kantner, right? And he could see it from other places. Dear Prudence, of course, uses that riff, and, there's been a number of different songs that people have talked about. It actually goes back for centuries. The falling tetrachord, as it's called, is one of the most important stock bass lines in the Baroque era, and often tied to laments, but also used for other things. So I think when it comes up, I mean, it's just a great thing, that falling line. And it isn't always in the bass. For example, on that Marvin Gaye recording that people cite from 1968, the bass is actually playing a drum note on the tonic, and it's the high voice that descends. So you can articulate it in all kinds of ways. It's a song called You're All I Need to Get By Marvin Gaye and Tammy Terrell.
You're all I need to get by. Like sweet morning dew, I took one look at you, and it was plain to see you were my destiny.
When Dick Lotfula began releasing shows from the Dead's vault in the early 1990s, he sometimes labeled it the Mud Love Buddy Jam. and as he referred to it on KPFA when filling in for David Gans in 1995.
My armpit left the universe theme, which we'll rename soon.
There's also an issue, because if you name something, that changes it, you objectify it, you make it into a thing. And in a way, you control it by naming it, right? So, in my own analyses of Dark Star, I gave names to various things, but I feel mixed about it, because should they have names? I mean, everybody who loves this music knows this stuff through perception that is not verbalized necessarily. And although people like to talk about it, if you start naming things in a kind of an official capacity, like, oh, that's the mind left body jam. And, Phil didn't like that, right? And I think a lot of musicians balk at the idea that their feeling of serendipity and the complex emotions that they bring to playing something would then be reified into some simple name. Oh, that's this, as if we couldn't handle the fact that it's actually very contested at any moment and comes out of a rich store of memories and possibilities. So, yeah, it's a fascinating problem, right?
It was hardly a fixed piece of music. For comparison, here's a version of the theme from May 19th, 1974, coming out of Truckin', released on the Pacific Northwest 1973-1974 box set.
As listeners, you tend to fixate on something. It's materialized, and so it exists as a thing. Whereas as a player, there's a lot going through your mind, and things can be very fluid. Things can come out, memories can come back, and your fingers can lead you into areas that you haven't thought about or that you had gone into before. So it might be feeling very different for a player. The difference between an improvisation, a serendipitous moment, and actual strategy of playing something very specific. A lot of things come up, and in Dark Star, you have a lot of things that come up at different times. And you can hear echoes of all kinds of ideas, harmonic moves, melodic riffs, all kinds of things that pop up all over the place. How do you actually set them into an order? I don't know if you should really. It's this art of improvisation. Improvisation is not about just inventing something. It's also about who you are and where you've been and what's in your toolkit and how you feel that day.
The theme disappeared from the Dead's jams when they took their break from the road starting in late 1974. But the next year, a very similar progression appeared in Bob Weir's new song, The Music Never Stopped. Here from August 13th, 1975 at the Great American Music Hall, aka One from the Vault, the song's debut performance. Danny Ruby reporting again. By the end of the second night in St. Louis, when the band had started to crank up their closing tunes, and it was clear that everything had come off well, the people got into a partying mood that matched the sincerity, if not the frenzy, of the audience. All around, the people crowded into the spots where they could get a view of the band between the piles of speakers and amplifiers. I positioned myself to watch Jerry as he played a new riff to Going Down the Road Feeling Bad.
Well, the climate suits my clothes. Well, the climate suits my clothes. Well, the climate suits my clothes. I'm gonna be treated this way.
In 1974, the band didn't come to St. Louis, only getting as close as Des Moines and Louisville. Jerry Garcia played local solo shows in 74, 75, and 76, continuing a low-key connection with the city. But by the time the Dead made it back in 77, it was no longer Pacific Presentations and Sky High Associates. Things had changed, as Tony Dwyer remembers.
We had tried to engage them for shows in 74, I think, and they had written back and said that they would entertain offers in 1975 Sky Associates and the Grateful Dead never did another show together, and basically Pacific Presentations may have done one or two after that, and that was it, and they did a fuckload of them. They did a ton of them.
Sepp Donahower of Pacific Presentations recalls the period fondly, and for good reason.
That whole time window of like 71 through 74, to me, I listen to the old stuff. I think that's my favorite time window of the Grateful Dead's music. Because they were young and on fire, and I was young and on fire, but you listen, and I look at all of the box sets and releases that have come out of the Grateful Dead and how many of those are my shows, and I go, wow. So that's really the fertile period, I think, for a lot of these releases, because you can hear the energy level.
In early 1974, Sam Cutler and Out of Town Tours were relieved of their duties as the Dead's booking agents, for reasons far too complex to address here.
David Parker and Richard Lauren pretty much took over, and the Dead went on hiatus at that point.
And so ended that era of the Grateful Dead in St. Louis, covered by the Listen to the River box set. When they came back in 1977, they tried the St. Louis Arena, which is worth mentioning as a postscript here. In early 1979, Jerry Garcia recounted that show, May 15th, 1977, to WLIR DJ Ray White.
It's really hard to tell whether it's going to be a good night or a bad night. Sometimes we've gone into those places. I remember there's one in St. Louis that we played about a year ago, I guess, maybe a little longer than that. And the place is so totally atrocious. I mean, the sound was horrible. It was like, every one of us, everybody in the band, during our intermission, was like laughable. You couldn't even complain about it. It was so horrible.
It was a horrible fucking room. But it was cheap. It was an old fucking basketball and a hockey arena. I mean, and it was a dome. It was the worst fucking acoustics in the world. I think I saw the Dave Clark 5 there in 1965 in an afternoon show. It was worse, far worse than the Armory. There never should ever have been any shows produced there, but there were.
But the Dead show at the St. Louis Arena was a good example of how even the band could continue to expect the unexpected, and perhaps doubly so in St. Louis.
When we came back for the second half, it was this magical transformation sort of occurred where we sort of gave up. We said, we'll never, pardon me, folks, edit. Those of you out there who belong to the law, we just said, the heck with it. I'm not on the log. We'll just do as well as we possibly can, and it came together. We sort of overcame the acoustics or something like that. I don't know.
Maybe there really was something in the water. That show can be heard on the May 1977 box set released in 2013. Of course, there's only one song that can soundtrack our goodbye to St. Louis in the 70s. But for now, we'll just sit right here and watch the river flow.
Thanks to all of our St. Louis guests throughout these episodes who have helped uncover these unsung tales surrounding the Dead's St. Louis legacy. Many moons ago, my buddy George Rankin and I were barbecuing some lunch at my folks' place. We took advantage of being the only ones home, fired up the grill in a fat one, and dropped the needle on side one of my parents' original vinyl copy of American Beauty. As Sugar Magnolia came to an end, we both remarked about what a great song it is, and then looked at each other quizzically as the song started over on its own. Whoa, heavy. I walked back in the house from the patio to investigate and found my mom dancing in the kitchen as she exclaimed, "Hope you don't mind, I just love this song so much." My parents turned me on to all kinds of great music, and it was nice to have that in common with them as I was growing up. It was an honor to have them on the podcast today. Thanks for listening, and take care out there. Executive producers for the good old Grateful Deadcast, Mark Pincus and Doran Tyson. Produced for Rhino Entertainment by Rich Mahan Productions and Jesse Jarno. Special thanks to David Lemieux. All rights reserved.